I did a lot of brainstorming, but it was when I watched the movie Die Hard that I thought, what if John McClane died? What if John McClane was killed? Is he going to give up? No. Even as a ghost, he's going to try and save the people in Nakatomi Plaza, including his wife. That was my concept. This is a real quote from game director Yosuke Shiokawa, and I have generally no clue what the hell he meant by this. Murdered Soul Suspect is a game that could not be less like Die Hard. As was a trend in 2014, Square-Enix wanted to appeal to the Western audience. A mistake Capcom made many times. To this end, they contacted Airtight Games, a small studio that made the fantastic Quantum Conundrum, but also more relevantly made Dark Void, a failed Capcom Western-focused game. The studio's first job was a failed Japanese publisher attempt at appealing to the West, and this was their last. Murdered Soul Suspect sunk the studio. The game released simultaneously on PC, Xbox 360, Xbox One, PS3, and PS4. Incredible that it hit the 7th gen, given how not great it runs even on the 8th gen consoles. Murdered Soul Suspect's very funny name can't save it from its blatant core issues. The gameplay is very bad. It's very apparent that the game took some, let's call it, inspiration from LA Noire, but misses a lot of the key points that made that game interesting and fun. The primary gameplay is a direct play on LA Noire's investigations. Our hero and not alive man Ronan O'Connor wanders about a small area looking for clues to add to his ghost notebook. He doesn't actually write stuff down, but he remembers everything extremely well. Unlike LA Noire though, a lot of the depth is stripped out. There's no rotating objects to find additional clues, and when it comes to solving the mystery, sort of the equivalent to the questioning segments, there's no fail state. Fucking up results in losing a badge, but all that affects is an achievement. While in LA Noire, there was at least a few segments where reaching the wrong conclusion could force you to go back or even lose evidence entirely, making later sections harder. It does present a few funny ideas. Ronan is a ghost. Oh, yeah, I haven't gotten to that yet, but regardless, due to this, he can possess people to look through their eyes, overhear their conversations, or influence them to ask the questions he needs to progress. It's still rather shallow. It's hard to feel like a detective when you wander around mashing X and eventually answering a question with no fail state. Although admittedly, it's fun to see what people are thinking as they look at the chaos the Bell Killer left in his wake, although I wish there was a slightly wider pool of random dialogue. It's weird that almost every woman in Salem, Massachusetts thinks about the Square-Enix property Tomb Raider pretty much constantly. Ronan being a ghost also gives him no clip for most of the game, although he can't move through dead buildings. I don't know how bricks die, I guess it's just buildings that aren't around anymore. You'd hope no clip would tie into the gameplay somehow, but usually it's just kinda funny. It takes some adjustment too, something that also happens to Ronan in the cutscenes as he gets more used to phasing. It's cute narrative parody, and some characters shuddering when Roman passes through them is also a nice touch. This game also lacks payoff. Most cases in LA Noire break up the investigation and talking with something exciting. Shootouts, foot or car chases, big set pieces, and while it is kind of unfair to compare this to a Rockstar game, the game has essentially two payoffs. Possessing a cat to do very janky on-rails platforming where you automatically jump if the cat chooses to do so, which it doesn't always, and some of the lamest stealth ever conceived. Some areas in the game have demons, big spooky evil ghosts that patrol in short predictable patterns. They usually don't have more than 1 or 2 turns, and just go in a small circle. Ronan can execute these at close range from behind by doing a quick time event, assuming the game doesn't just decide that he doesn't kill them. It happens a distressing amount of the time. There's really just no mechanics here. If they see Ronan, they come to kill, he can jump between the remnants of dead ghosts to avoid them, and after a painfully long time, they'll fuck off back to their routes. The only tools Ronan has are the inability for demons to see through walls and occasionally crows in the environment that will temporarily distract them. For a game whose primary mode of action is stealth, it's very shallow and repetitive. Rooms have 3 to 4 ghosts, you use the crow for an easy kill on one, you jump between soul spots, you come out, snag a kill, and repeat. It couldn't be more tedious if it tried. Weirdly enough, this never happens in the city of Salem, only in the interior areas. The open world in this game is pleasantly small and nice to explore, but it does devolve into sprinting around the city from plot point to plot point. Demons may have been a nice way to break it up beyond collecting the game's numerous collectibles and doing the 3 entire side quests. Especially as an open area, it would give much more interesting options for navigating around them. All this is a giant red flag for a game, and honestly, it's a huge weight on it. There's no, but at least this is good. Outside of the inherent humor of no clipping about, the game is pretty much miserable to play. This isn't really the end of the story though. Despite how genuinely unfun the game is, it actually has some stuff I really love, nonetheless the narrative, which I'll get to very soon. Ronan is a cool design, or at least elements of him are. He definitely looks like a guy who would be in Blink-182 or some shit, but I think he's got a charm about him too. The transparent effect he carries throughout the game, especially the way he fades out more and more towards the ground, is really cool, and the orange bullet holes that mark the wounds that killed him give him a really strong visual identity from a glance. The ghost cigarette is a little silly, and it's a bit distracting that he's always puffing it, but even then, it gives him a strong character. You kinda know that that's just how he is. It's also kind of weird to see cigarettes in games, since they don't usually get included because they just automatically bump a game up to M. This game doesn't really have swearing or like hard violence, so it's kind of out of nowhere that they would decide to allow him to do this. I can't really say the same for anyone else. Main character or not, most of the people in Salem are kind of plain, and there's a ridiculous amount of repeated models. I enjoy Salem a lot too. The condensed map is comfy, and the very blue atmosphere makes the whole place feel cold and haunted alongside the remnants of long-gone buildings, and the old architecture the places that remain have. Interiors tend to be on the generic side admittedly, although there's occasionally neat ties to Salem's history with the witch trials. The atmosphere is also up by the ghosts in the area. Not just the buildings, but ghosts that appear in the distance, staring from the edge of view and vanishing when Ronan gets close. As silly as it is, given they're just JPEGs floating in the distance, it's a nice bit of ambiance that makes the haunting atmosphere a little more tangible. A few of the side areas catch the atmosphere nicely too. The graveyard especially, which is loaded with lost souls and wondering where it all went wrong. I've never been very good with music, but I do like that the atmospheric pieces are often broken up with some strings. This game has a strong atmosphere of being lost in this empty, withering place that ties it all together. I do need to touch on the game's fairly unfortunate performance, an issue that's almost entirely focused in the overworld. The large map and decent amount of NPCs leads to a lot of issues, frame drops, stuttering, screen tearing. I can't even imagine how much worse it would be on the 360, because the issues the game has are readily apparent playing the Xbox One version on an Xbox Series X. Interior or more linear areas like the graveyard don't suffer from these issues nearly as often, but it's bad enough to be a constant distraction while exploring the otherwise very strong Salem. Dialogue and action scenes also tend to be a little bit stilted, which is something that's pretty common in gaming, with characters awkwardly staring at each other. Dynamic action is definitely not something this game was capable of putting out. Starting the game with the main character's death is kinda bold, as is him going to purgatory and FaceTiming his dead wife who's in heaven. Ghosts are people with something unresolved to work out before they can move on in this universe. It's a little weird he doesn't need to solve Julia's murder. She's killed 2 years before the game in a random stabbing and the perp is never found, and it's kinda just never brought up after the initial time. It's also a touch silly when he tries to hop back into his own body, but it builds a strong immediate mystery. The plot centers, even more than Ronan, on the Bell Killer, a serial killer who's been terrorizing Salem. It's not that surprising he would kill Ronan, given he's a detective and all, although the game seems to make a point about how it seems like Ronan was being targeted as well. It's a very good hook for the game, that you have to solve your own murder to move on to heaven. The crime scene also serves to introduce most of our major characters. Rex, Ronan's brother-in-law, who's the chief of police, and is obviously rather upset about his sister getting murdered and now his brother-in-law getting murdered. Baxter, the gruff, rude, bullheaded cop that never liked Ronan, and once inside the loft that Ronan was thrown from the window of, Joy, a 15-year-old girl that the Bell Killer was hunting when Ronan interrupted him. There's a few inherent issues in Ronan needing to piece together the own moments of his death. I mean, he was there, and the game probably could have just started with him alive. I think that would have been a little more surprising, but it's all kind of washed away by the interesting story structure on display. Working back from Ronan's death and seeing it play out as clues are picked up gives this odd sense of disorientation. Ronan is trying to figure out how and why he got here just as the player is. It's another great hook for this early part of the game. Beyond that, you have other hooks. Baxter is too convenient of a red herring, or is he? What about Joy made her a target to the Bell Killer, and why did he go out of his way to kill Ronan? The game makes it clear that Ronan was a target too, and that the Bell Killer had a vendetta. The game also has good pacing when it's not being a game. The investigations are pretty slow in plotting, but the game is good at giving information out when it needs to keep things interesting. Immediately upon becoming a ghost, Ronan meets a ghost girl who quickly lays out the rules of being a ghost. Can only enter buildings through an open window or door. I think that's a vampire thing, but sure, I need to cut the open world off somewhere so the game doesn't explode. Can't walk through ghost walls, what demons are and why to avoid them, and so on. Efficient storytelling is a good thing here. The game is only about 6 hours long, and pushing through it at a good pace makes it feel short and sweet rather than letting it burn out near the end. I may as well touch on Collectives here too, as they provide various bits of story, although honestly it's not a whole lot. The Ronin's past ones deal with his time as a criminal and his life with his dead wife, Julia, before becoming a cop, which is a nice bit of detail for Ronin, who isn't much of a talker, especially about himself. Julia also has her own collectibles that gives some very lame text-based backstory, mostly centering on Ronin's tattoos. Seriously, there's like 10 that are just, what does this tattoo mean? The Ghost Girl's drawings all offer vague allusions to the nature of death that don't add much, as far as I understand. Information on the killer is newspaper clippings and wanted posters that don't meaningfully build the mystery, and the town's history collectibles give information about Salem's historic landmarks and its infamous witch trials, which can be admittedly kind of interesting. The most interesting collectible, though, are the ghost stories. Each area has collectibles exclusive to it, and upon collecting them all, the player can watch a narrated ghost story. These are wholly unrelated to the plot, and I'm unsure if they're collections of older ghost stories or original pieces written for this game, but I found them to be an interesting little reward for exploration. The church has a few notable gameplay elements. There's one moment where Ronin needs to possess the priest to cross over the lost soul pit that otherwise kills it. You can do a quick time event to get out of it, but hypothetically it kills him. If this idea ever escalated to you guiding dudes around by activating objects in the environment with poltergeist, it'd be like 3D Ghost Trick. We aren't that lucky, as this idea is more or less tossed aside and only used 2 or 3 more times in the game with no escalation. The cat section first appears here. It's very jank, and of course there are the demons. I've been over how good the stealth is. Not very. Joy is one of the elements that helps this game come together. Her and Ronin form a bit of an odd buddy cop dynamic. Joy's mother has gone missing, and both her and Joy are mediums. Probably the reason the Bell Killer is hunting her, and she's the one living person who can see Ronin. Not only is she not surprised to see him, she's rather irritated about having yet another ghost begging her for help, and initially ditches him to search on her own. Ronin remains relatively stoic and quiet, but he's rather pragmatic about the fact that they both have the same goal, finding the Bell Killer, and that will probably lead to Joy's mom. The two start out at odds. Ronin is a bit overprotective at times, and needs a lot from Joy since he can't open doors or talk to people, and Joy just wants the ghosts to piss off, but they begin to get along better throughout the game, and it serves as a nice emotional core for the story beyond being an interesting whodunit. Rescuing Joy from the police station after she's immediately arrested for ditching Ronin has some almost cool ideas that never pan out. Cops litter the station, and Ronin can interact with objects in the environment to move them around to clear a path for Joy, although this rather cool idea never serves as a puzzle or stealth segment. Joy is functionally invisible to the cops, and only moves when they're dealt with. They'll never see her, so there's no element of timing or misdirection to make it a stealth sequence where you're not controlling the character who's being sneaky, which would be an interesting twist. And really, the only way to interact with the police is to turn on printers in the area to get them to move. No need to change things or take specific actions to get them to move somewhere you need them to be. Spamming the poltergeist button and spinning in a circle is all that's ever asked, which is honestly a shame, as again, this could be some really cool 3D Ghost Trick stuff if it was more of a game. The best moment here is possessing Joy to cross another lost soul path. Her psychic abilities make it very weird for her, and she usually rejects doing it, which makes the uncomfortable start of the buddy cop story even more fun. Joy's psychic mom is revealed to have been assisting the police, specifically Baxter with the Bell Killer case, although Baxter is now demoted. There's nothing damning, but Baxter does have her book stashed away behind a hidden shelf. Either the story is badly written and Baxter's the killer, he's a very flagrant red herring, or it's some kind of double twist. The graveyard is one of the cooler areas in the game. Pretty much every inch is crawling with ghosts, duh. All of them pretty lost as to where it all went wrong. When they find out Joy can see them, they all riot around her looking for help, which is a funny little bit that ties into her own initial annoyance with Ronin. An unsolved murder not officially tied to the Bell Killer leads to chasing down the victim's ghost to get more information. Ronin unlocks the new instant transmission ability. It's used in an interesting way once, not in this level. But I guess LARPing as Dead Goku is kind of fun, and it's moderately useful in stealth. Ronin also learns that ghosts can transfer memories by contact, something that's very helpful given the murdered girl is only capable of screaming and seems terrified of him. It's not really made clear why, just that after getting horribly murdered, she's not in much of a mood for talking, which I guess is pretty reasonable. Looking through the notebook, Ronin and Joy also find info on someone who survived the Bell Killer and is now locked in a weirdly 1940s style asylum. It's worth noting that this entire game takes place over the course of one singular night, and it's already dark out when Ronin dies. Even in the summer, sunset is around 8:30 in Salem, Massachusetts, and yet this level introduces the ticking clock element that Iris, the survivor, is going to go through electroshock therapy in mere minutes. It's gotta be fast approaching midnight, so why are they doing it now? I'm not usually one to overthink plot holes, but in this scenario, if you remove the ticking clock element, nothing really changes. Your goal is still to break into a fully staffed asylum and sneak a patient out. This area also, I think, tries a little too hard to be spooky. The weirdly decrepit state of the asylum and the old-timey wheelchairs clash in a setting where the asylum receptionist has a fucking computer. That aside, the stuff with Iris is neat. She's a raving lunatic and is immune to possession. Her drawings around the room reveal what happened. Her sister Rose was attacked at the same time and sacrificed herself for Iris. The reason Ronan can't possess her is because her sister is still with her, inside her more accurately. Which is a really cool little, I guess, foreshadowing, even though it only happens like 5 minutes before. Iris is also a medium, which establishes a true pattern, and Joy takes her back to the church for her safety. In the downtime, Ronan goes to the Salem Museum, which is hosting a new exhibit on the witch trial. Pretty quickly it becomes clear that the Bell Killer is killing in ways the alleged witches were, burning Rose, drowning the girl in the graveyard, and so on. Tying the central mystery of the game into a real-world location's dark history is really cool, especially because it's so deeply entrenched in the history of Salem. It fleshes out the Bell Killer's motivations pretty straightforwardly, that he thinks mediums are witches and is taking things way back. The one cool gameplay segment in the museum is the train. The gas station just outside the museum has a ghostly remnant of a track, and that track runs into the museum itself, complete with the ghostly remnants of a moving train that Ronan needs to instant transmission past as it rushes through. It's both a cool visual and a neat idea for action, even if it's rather brief and simple. Ronan's investigation in the upper level of the museum also gives him a new lead, or expands on an old one, I suppose, as he finds a painting shoved into the corner, and he is able to somehow deduce that it was hidden by our old friend Baxter. I don't really know how he gets to that conclusion. He touches the painting and he's like, Baxter hid this. Immediately upon leaving the museum, Ronan happens across police cars heading to the church. Baxter's missing, Joy is arrested, again, and the Bell Killer got Iris. She seems surprisingly okay with it and forgives Ronan for fucking up horribly before going to heaven. This game is only 6 hours long, they can't be burning time on drama. It's worth noting that Ronan also tells Joy to tell Rex about the ghosts. I don't know how he expects that to play out, but it is what it is. Anyway, the church is just a sideshow to pop off some exposition. Baxter's missing and was last seen heading to the Judgement House, a decrepit building on the edge of Salem that belonged to the judge that presided over the witch trials. And honestly, the first place Ronan should have checked when he saw the witch trial-themed murders. The Judgement House is basically the endgame. I mean, look at this horrible demon encounter. This is basically the final boss of the game. The mystery deepens with each discovery throughout. The Bell Killer has been operating for hundreds of years, killing mediums every once in a while before disappearing and repeating the cycle. Baxter is dead. The biggest twist is that he was a wholly competent detective and continued investigating the case after he was kicked off of it by Rex, Ronan's brother. And it really makes Ronan look like a dipshit, although, to be fair, Baxter was also getting help from Joy's mother, who is alive and well in a safe house, and psychically told him about the Judgement House. This is where the game also gives us some answers, and we finally unravel the case. Tucked in a cell in the back of the basement is the game's final investigation. Our old pal, the Ghost Girl, was sentenced to death here for falsely accusing people of being witches. The Ghost Girl is Abigail Williams, and she was a real person in real life. And in tying this game with Salem's history, was actually one of the 2 children whose accusations spurred the Salem witch trials. Shortly after the witch trials, she fell out of the historical record. She probably didn't get executed in real life like she did in this game. The other girl didn't, we know she lived a full life. Knowing the time period, she probably died of polio or got a leg amputated for a splinter and died of infection. While the ghost being behind everything isn't the biggest twist in the world, I kinda suspected it at certain points because, this is a game about ghosts. I think it's interesting both as it's clearly not the whole story and because of its ties to Salem's history. The big finale of the game is back at the museum. The gameplay genuinely just stops here. The entire final battle is running up to Joy, who's been taken by a possessed Rex to the museum to kill her, by running around some lost souls, running up to Abigail, and watching the story play out. It's probably the most ridiculous ending, gameplay-wise, that I've ever seen in a game. I'm not saying I would have preferred demons, I wouldn't. Do you think that there'd be something more in any singular way? Both of the very mediocre core gameplay aspects are thrown out entirely here, and you just do 2 QuickTime events. I do like the story payoff though. Rex is the killer, Abigail's possession powers are strong enough to make him do it, and of course the police chief is the perfect target. He can demote Baxter, misdirect the police force, not that they'd suspect ghosts, I imagine, and everyone in Salem trusts him because he's a nice guy. The bigger twist comes in the reveal that Rex wasn't the only killer. Baxter and even Ronan were also puppets for the murders, and both of them were killed once their usefulness was used up. I like it on a number of levels. The story doesn't have many pieces on the board. Rex, Baxter, Ronan, Joy, and Joy's mother are the only characters who could even feasibly be involved, and we can mark two of those off pretty immediately, Ronan and Joy. Baxter is a fairly obvious red herring, which mostly leaves Joy's unseen mother and Rex. Either plausible, but both kind of weird. Making the killer everyone is a good way to divert attention and pay off the mystery, especially as by the time it gets to this point, Abigail will mostly be forgotten. It also does what good twists do and recontextualizes elements before in a new light. Ronan specifically was used to kill the girl at the lake. She knew this, hence her fear of them, although because he was possessed, he doesn't remember or understand this. It's good stuff, genuinely. The conclusion is pretty cool too, as Ronan and Abigail torture each other using the power he discovered at the graveyard, reading each other's minds and forcing them to relive their traumas. It does kind of just end though, when Abigail summons lost souls to drag Ronan to hell and he somehow just gets out and puts her in. It doesn't even really show it, he just kind of grabs her hand and she's like, oh, I remember being killed. And then he's out and she's in. It feels a bit like an ass pull, but I don't know how you would resolve this otherwise because she's dead. I do have to wonder why she didn't just do the QuickTime event to hop out of the soul pit though. And with that, everything wraps up happily. The Bell Killer's in hell, Ronan is in heaven, and Joy is with her mom. It'd be nice if there was a little bit more to the ending because it does kind of abruptly end. Not Kane and Lynch abrupt, but pretty abrupt. Still, it's satisfying enough. I'm just going to conclude from here. It's not like this game has anything beyond the story mode. There's no alternative media or multiplayer, which is honestly a bit refreshing. Murdered Soul Suspect is a bad game. Point blank, it's not fun. The gameplay is boring, shallow, clumsy, and you never really get to feel like a detective. Ronan stumbles about a room picking up every piece of garbage and taking blind guesses in a vague facsimile of LA Noire, and good lord, the cell sections. That said, I found myself engrossed in the story. The mystery is strong, keeps you guessing, and Joy and Ronan make a nice buddy cop pairing. I was caught off guard by elements of the twist and enjoyed the unraveling narrative, never knowing if Baxter was the killer and the game was just badly written, or if there was some kind of double twist coming up, being surprised when Abigail came back into the narrative, learning that Ronan was involved. I think it's a really solid murder mystery with a fun ghost twist, and it ties into the history of its location really well. My biggest hang-up is that this game really doesn't benefit from being a game at all. The worst parts are when it is a game, and there's no choice or narrative consequence to the gameplay. This could have made for a great TV miniseries, or maybe a comic book or manga where they could really go nuts with the visuals, and the story would be allowed to breathe without needing to derail itself for bad stealth segments. It's a nice story and one that's surprisingly well told, but one that's just tacked into a medium that it doesn't fit. I'm sure there's some universe where it could work. LA Noire works in a similar idea and structure, but LA Noire pays off story elements constantly with good gameplay, takes advantage of being a game, and is comprised of a bunch of smaller detective stories that feed into a larger story and give a better sense of satisfaction of actually solving mysteries instead of kind of stumbling into the answer at the end. As it stands, Murdered is a game almost completely destroyed by its gameplay. An interesting and creative story kneecapped by the most boring, dry, and clumsy gameplay imaginable. I like Murdered, and I can half recommend pushing through it just for the story elements. It's not like the game is painful in any way, it's very, very easy, basically mindless. But man, it just shouldn't have been a video game.